Today we've got another full in-depth review for you of this guy. It's the Sony 10-18 f4. It's an ultra-wide crop sensor zoom lens for you from Sony. And as usual, we'll be breaking down everything that's important to do with this lens so you can determine if it's going to be right for you or not. Let's get started. Welcome back, friends. Today we're looking at the 10-18 f4. It's a Sony crop sensor ultra wide zoom lens, and we're going to be breaking everything you need to know down. Of course, here's some stats to get you going. If you haven't seen one of my videos before, my name's Stefan Malloch. I do a lot of photography and filmmaking news reviews and tutorials, so if this does help you out, if you like this type of content, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. But right before we jump into build and features, I wanted to just answer who this lens is actually for. You're not going to find it so much in a professional's bag just because it is a crop sensor lens with a maximum aperture of f4. This lens is very specific in its use. It's not a huge focal range from 10 to 18, or basically a 15 to 27 millimeter equivalent on a crop sensor camera. It's kind of limited to what you can use it for. You're going to be able to use it for things like real estate, landscape, cityscape, and that type of thing. It's going to be okay for video and vlogging because you're going to be able to fit a lot of stuff in that frame. So I wouldn't really say it's going to be a professional lens by any means, although you can produce some fantastic results from it because it is a pricey, but as you'll see, great performing lens. Now let's dive into build and features. So here's a quick look at what's in the box as well as the build and features. You'll find your basic paperwork and the lens itself, and that's pretty much it. I was a little bit disappointed that Sony hadn't included a little pouch or something given the price point of this lens, but oh well, this is all you really get. The lens is a great size and weight, measuring only 3 3/4 inches with the lens hood installed and only 2.5 without. It's very light at about 225 grams or about half a pound. And it does extend just a little bit when you zoom, but if you're using the lens hood, you won't even notice. The overall quality and feeling of this lens is decent for what it is. For the price, I might have expected a little bit more, but it's nothing horrible. It's definitely not the worst, and it's nowhere near the best. Unfortunately, you won't find any buttons or switches on this lens whatsoever, and both the zoom and focus rings turn confidently and firmly. On the front, you'll find 62mm filter threads, and yes, it does accommodate filters as well. It also has a great minimum focus distance of 0.82 feet, or just under 10 inches, allowing you to get up close and personal with your subjects. It's also image stabilized, letting you get nice and crispy images and video at lower shutter speeds. It's got a nice sturdy metal mount, but unfortunately, it lacks a little rubber gasket for confidence when it comes to weather sealing. Overall for build, it's decently made with a great size and weight and a few features that are nice. I give it 3.5 stars. Okay, so let's quickly touch on value. This is a pricey lens, but given the competition, which there really is none, and how well this thing performs, its value is actually pretty good. We'll get into performance here in a minute, but I really question why all these full frame lenses are so much more expensive when this thing's really doing about the same job. For value, I give it 4 stars. When it comes to performance, I'm happy to report that this thing performs very well in pretty much every regard. Its autofocus is fast and basically silent. Although being an ultra-wide lens, it's not overly demanding. This lens only has an 8mm focal range, which doesn't sound like a lot, but at that huge ultra-wide zoom angles, every millimeter makes a pretty big difference, as you can see here. Here's what that looks like in stills. Image stabilization is a great feature to have. However, in video, it really doesn't work that well. Here it is working in conjunction with the IBIS in my A6600. And here's what it looks like with the image stabilization turned off. Overall for video, not a fantastic performance. You'll notice more of a difference when taking photos at lower shutter speeds, but to be honest, I find myself using this lens when there's plenty of light or on a tripod. And I think for the most part in the real world, that's where you're going to be using your ultra-wide lenses. It's going to be great for things like real estate or interior shots, landscapes, or when you really want to add a big distortion look to your photos. Now let's have a quick look at the sharpness and the optics of this lens. Starting at 10mm in the center wide open at f4, it's a great performance. The corners, however, are not the greatest, but okay. Stopping down to 5.6, you see a noticeable improvements into the corners, and your best is going to be around f8. That's going to continue down to about f11, and after f11, you're going to get some softness start to kind of creep back in. Overall, an okay performance at 10mm. Having a look now zoomed all the way into 18mm, in the center is nice and sharp, and the corners are actually pretty darn good too. Stopping down to 5.6 for great looking corners, and that's going to continue all the way to f8 once again, all the way to f11. After f11, you're going to get a little bit of softness start to creep in, all the way to f16, but for the most part, a fantastic performance at 18mm, and overall, I'm impressed by this lens. When it comes to distortion and vignetting, wide open at 10mm here, if we turn the profile correction off, we see a little bit of distortion as well as some vignetting. Stopping down to f5.6, you're going to see that vignetting go away, but the distortion is going to remain all throughout the aperture range. Having a look zoomed in all the way to 18mm with the profile correction turned off, there's also some definite heavy vignetting as well as some pincushion distortion, neither of which are as bad as I'd expect to see from this lens. Once again, stop down to see that vignetting go, but for the most part, that distortion is going to remain. An all-around great performance for both the sharpness and the optics of this lens. Let's look at the bokeh of this lens. It's an ultra-wide angle lens with 7 aperture blades, so you shouldn't expect the world out of this thing. And after all, that's definitely not what you buy this lens for. Having said that, like most things about this lens, it's actually better than I expected. But you be the judge. Overall for performance, this lens is actually very surprising, and in a good way. I would say it meets or even exceeds the expectations that we have of most ultra-wide full-frame lenses. So in that regard, it's very good and I give it 4 stars. Okay, so let's wrap up this review and get to the bottom line here. This lens being quite a few years old now, and not having a heck of a lot of competition, I'd have to say is probably still your best option for an APS-C camera. It's a little bit pricey, but when you look at the performance and what you're getting, the size, the weight, it's just a fantastic option. As usual, here's my personal pros and cons for this lens, and I really had to look for some cons. I must say that I do enjoy almost everything to do with this lens. You could almost forget about it around your neck because it's so small and so light, and that partnered with being such an ultra-wide lens, it's just got a lot of character and it's a great storytelling lens. I think every photographer should have an ultra-wide lens. They're just fun to use. So rating this lens as a whole, I think you're getting the idea. I think this is a solid lens and I give it 4 stars. And if you're a subscriber, you also know that I like to rate things on a scale from never think about again to consider to definitely buy. And in this case, if you're an APS-C shooter looking for an ultra-wide lens, well, there's not much out there, and this one just happens to be amazing. So yeah, I absolutely recommend this lens to you, and I would strongly consider it. There are a few wide-angle manual primes kicking around out there, but ultimately they're not going to be as versatile. And if you're happy and content being an APS-C shooter, then I think this is a great option for you. If you are thinking about going to full frame in the future, you can consider looking into something like the 16-35, but do keep in mind it's not going to be as wide as this one. Okay, so let's leave it at that. That's my review of this guy, the Sony 10-18 f4. I hope I've answered all your questions and I hope you enjoyed this video and it helped you out. And if it did, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. Drop your questions and comments down below, of course. If you want to pick up this lens if you're ready to buy it, I'll leave affiliate links down in the description for you. And of course, make mistakes, be yourself, and get out there and take some more pictures. See you next time.